Good afternoon, everyone. You're going to have to bear with me a little bit. This is my first live stream experience with a laptop in a garage, so um, sure there'll be some hiccups, latency issues here as we go along. But welcome to the webcast here. Um, just a little of layout how we're going to do this. I'd like to show a different way to use composite materials from, well, what I normally do. I usually build things uh, with carbon fiber and epoxy. And it occurred to me that you can use them as well for temporary or somewhat permanent fix as well when you are on a trail and the bike goes down and you break something. Thinking outside the box is usually what I do when I create things. If it's carbon fiber luggage boxes, headlights, bash plates. Heck, I even made a roof top carrier from carbon fiber. And so it can be used in so many different ways. And with the modern day epoxies that are available, you can fix just about anything with them. Adding carbon fiber to that epoxy, then you have something very, very strong. So I just finished well, almost 2 day bike adventure trip and been, pardon all the mess here, still unpacking from the trip. Um, but a little bit of carnage. We ended up having to just bend things back into place, which was great. But I thought that sometimes on the trail things do go wrong. And when they do, they can set you back and somewhat strand you at the position that you're in, and you have to call for help. One of the most obvious ones is if your bike dumps to the left and you break the clutch lever. And obviously you need a clutch to go home unless you have something with a double clutch or something else in there, maybe a recluse or something like that. So you also can use epoxies to patch engine covers. If you hit a rock and spill the oil and whatnot. Many of you might be familiar with JB Weld, which is a polymer product as well that you sort of like mix to a clay consistency and shove into the engine case and let it harden and off you go. So again, I'm seeing here in my computer that I'm at 100% resources. So if the picture is jacky, my apologize for it. That's not the intent, but it is unfortunately the best that I can do. So at this point, I'll get better at it. I'll have probably something better than a 10-year-old laptop here. But the way that I'd like to do this is we're going to cover a few items. Then I'm going to don the gloves, mix some epoxy. But I also have the chat session open up here. So what I'd like to do is show and tell a bit first, and then gather questions that you have, and just type them up in the chat section there, and then I'll try to answer that as good as I humanly can. But I got to let go of the gloves here first. So one of the most obvious things is if your bike takes a nap. This is a carbon fiber lever. Let me get to a different screen here, pardon me. Carbon fiber lever for an F800 GS that I made for the clutch when I was beta testing the recluse clutch for that bike. So I made that, and then in the process I had an OEM clutch lever for an F800 GS, and I hacked it in half. And I thought, well, let's pretend that you dumped the bike to the left and you broke the lever, possibly in a different place like that. So what we're going to try to do today is to fix a clutch lever. I will put it up in a vise here just temporarily so you can see it. And I'll zoom over to the materials here. You are probably all familiar with the household 5-minute epoxy that you could buy at the hardware store for, oh, I think $4 or $5. Well, most people use that just to patch ceramics and other things around the house, which is nice. It works really well. As with any polymer, it is created for a certain purpose. It sets really quick and does not necessarily have a lot of heat tolerance. So when you deal with polymers, you always have to be mindful of the temperature at which you're going to work that material. I have some up here that's called Max HTE from Polymer Composites. I use that and have used that in the past. I built 2 complete exhaust system or mufflers rather up from scratch, and it withstood up to a little over 500 degrees Celsius before it started breaking down. So, but with the household composite material here, it starts displacing at about 150 degrees. It starts turning into like Rubbermaid plastic. So this you can probably patch an engine case with, but it will take you home from the trail, but not much more than that. That you're familiar with, about $5 at the local hardware store. That's what we're going to use today. And then what keeps all this together is 2-inch carbon fiber tape. I've cut this piece here to about 10 inches or so. And I carry 2 of those with me on the trail, rolled up with a piece of paper towel and a, well, plastic, I guess, what do you call it, little film here to kind of lay it up with. And it's rolled up like this, and I carry that in my toolbox as well for 2 fixes if you wish. And then, of course, a couple of nitrile gloves, always done those. You should probably have those regardless. I mean, it's a quick and easy way to fix a chain or something else on the road if you need to. A cup to mix it all in, and then a popsicle stick or a stir stick, call it whatever you want to do. And then mechanically, we're going to arrest this with simple electrical tape. So you can see here that this is what we're going to work with. And it's not much. You can shove all of this into this cup and then just put it in your toolbox. And it's perhaps a little bit more bulky than what you prefer, but it will get you home. And it'll get you home rather fast, especially if it's a clutch lever. So a couple of things before we start mixing and ninjaing these materials together here is this is 5-minute epoxy. Now you could use really any epoxy that you want. It just depends on how quick do you want to get going again after you've been stranded. If you do it fast, you can do the 5-minute. The next up, you can find 20-minute epoxies. That gives you a little more time, but it also takes more time to set it in. So it really depends on, well, what you want to do. I think there's plenty of time to spare mixing this, but you can't mess around. Once you mix this, you got to stir it and you got to impregnate it, the carbon fiber, and you're going to have to do it rather fast. So the plan of action here is we're going to mix some of this in the cup here, and then as soon as it's done mixing, it's going to be a quick stir because this is just meant to get you home. We're going to then use the stir stick and saturate the carbon fiber tape as it lays down on the plastic, sort of like a poor man's impregnated or pre-preg of composite fibers. And then we're going to use this as a band-aid and quickly roll it around the brake on the clutch lever. And then as that begins to set, we're going to then use electrical tape as a mechanical mean to keep squeezing all of the resin out and compress the carbon fiber to a tighter squeeze onto the brake lever, or in this case, the clutch lever. And we're going to end up with about a 1-inch overlap. You can buy 3-inch tape, 4-inch tape, whatever that you want to buy, but it's not very expensive. It goes for, I think, $1.50, $2 or so per foot, linear foot. Very easy to work with, roll it up. So it's really just we're trying to band-aid something and make it stick. Your mirror brakes, well, that's not as important. Your brake lever brakes, well, that's not as important either. This stuff is strong enough that if your bike takes a dump and you break your luggage rack, this will hold it in place. Even if you have, well, 50 pounds on it, it will hold it in place, at least till you get home. So and then of course you can apply this anywhere. If you get a hole in the engine, even though it is the uh, poor man's epoxy, it probably will set up quick enough to get you home or off the trail. And that's the whole idea here, is to get a fix that will recover or self-recover you, and then you can get to a street, get to a road somewhere where you can call for help, or um, if the fix is still working, you can drive it all the way home. So we'll get started here. I'm going to pan this down to the workstation here real quick, and then I'll be moving it back and forth. I'm going to set this guy aside because that is my stash for the trip, and I'd simply just cut another piece of 10 inches here that will then be ready. So let me check real quick and make sure that nothing has popped up here in the meantime. Very good deal. All right, so instead of using this is also what I take with me to the on the trail. So I'm just gonna set that aside as well, and then I'll just use my regular stash of quick set epoxy here. So it may be easier, obviously, if you're so hold carbon fiber that it may be a little bit tough to hold that brake lever in place at the same time as like trying to hold that in place here while you're trying to roll that stuff around. Nevertheless, it is doable. Obviously, if you have an extra set of hands, that will be a whole lot easier. So, mind you, again, you have about a 5-minute time from you saturate or mix the polymers here. So things are going to go relatively quick. How much you mix, really, you don't need to mix but a spoonful of it, or at the very most. You mix any more, you're just going to make a bigger mess down on the floor. Then you just stir it. Tend to stir it for, I'm going to say, 20 to 30 seconds at the most. That will get you a pretty good, what you say, you're not going into the setting time if you only spent about 20-30 minutes. Now, if you're getting out of the desert and it's 100 degrees, you might need to knock that down to 10 seconds, literally, because everything will set so very quick. So then you just paste this stuff out onto the carbon fiber tape that you have. Use the stir stick to spread it out. You only need to spread it out on one side here. It'll squeeze on through. And then you're done with that. We'll move over to the brake lever. Just start with a couple of laps with a electrical tape so it is hanging down and ready to go. And then it is literally just a matter of you rolling on. It's a little bit difficult to get it started, but here again, it doesn't really matter how ugly it is, how pretty it is. All you are really interested in is to put a Band-Aid on a broken lever. You will find that as you start squeezing this stuff out, it kind of moves from side to side, becomes a little bit more difficult to put it in place. And then you just continue to roll it and roll it. That way you're essentially rolling that carbon on harder and harder. You can feel it starting getting hot when it begins to set. So the next thing you want to do is start work that tape down towards your carbon. Roll it on very easy, because this thing is going to tend to want to roll away. I can feel it heating up already now. But what you're essentially doing here is you're squeezing the resin out, and you continue to do that and then you can apply more and more tension on it. What you want to just be careful about here is that you don't start displacing the arm. I can feel it almost setting in now. So you can see you really don't have too much time to work with it. It goes very quick. Whenever you've done, say, 3 layers of this on top of it, all you then do is pull it away, and there you have it. Now, this will then sit and cure. I can feel my gloves getting sticky now as well. And then that's when you sit down and yourself a glass trail, and yourself lucky that you didn't break something that you have to fix on your bike. Only, should I say, but not on your body. Then as it sits and hardens here, I'm going to say you put a little plastic down on the floor here, because it's going to start dripping here in just a second. I'm just making a little catch can here for the drippings, and we should be good to go. The 5-minute epoxy per specs will set in 5 minutes. That means it will kind of turn into goo in about 5 minutes and set. And we can see that here it has already turned yellow, which is another sign of the hardening of it. So this is already set, and then it's really a matter of how quick you want to go home. You can kind of, man, this is already stiff. I can't displace this right now. It's already has been set. So is it smart for you to start moving already? Well, probably not. If you can, I'd say sit down, count yourself lucky that nothing broke on you, and let this thing, if you can give it a half hour, I think that would be great. By an hour, this thing will be rock hard. And obviously, if it's just the outer tip that breaks off, well, it's not that big of a deal. If it's all the way in, I'll just use the the carbon lever that I made for the 8GS, for example, if it breaks in here, you may need to let it sit a little bit longer. It just really depends. But the whole idea here that I wanted to show is that for under $10, call it about $5, $6 worth of stuff, you can bring yourself some help on the trail, because you can mix just about anything and fix it with the combination of epoxy and carbon fiber. Now, if it's a more of a complex task where it takes substantially longer time than you saw that I used to roll up the stuff in this lever here, then I would recommend that you pillage some 20-minute epoxy instead of 5 minutes, or if you're really going to travel far away, I use some 1618 from Polymer Composites here as well. It sets in about 2 hours or so, but you would definitely need it to sit for 3 or 4 hours in the desert or mountains or wherever you are at before that you would start putting any mechanically, well, induced stress on it like this here. So you can feel on the piece while we've been talking here. Well, excuse me, while I've been talking. On this thing here, it's good to go. So now I'll just find out where the end of it here is. That's easier said than done. Well, let's have a look here. I guess I wrote, oh, there it is. Can you do it without electrical tape? Sure, but you will never get the tight fit that you had before, or when you start mechanically squeezing the resin out and also compressing that whole matrix on that clutch lever here. The ratio between resin is about 30 to 60%. Man, the whole lever is warm from this thing here. 30% resin by weight and 66%, or should I say 2/3 of carbon fiber. And you can never really achieve that unless you mechanically squeeze the layup. You do that different ways. You can have vacuum layups where you vacuum pack your whole matrix, or you can get mechanical molds like the mold I created for my rear rag on the 12GS. So that's the purpose of this, but you can see the beauty thing about electrical tape is once you start unwrapping it, it kind of does not stick to the epoxy and is somewhat easy to get off. This was not the cleanest wrap I've ever done, but I can assure you with the 6 total wraps, I think of 6 or 7 that came out of this with a 10-inch long strip, this is going to be plenty strong in getting you home. Gonna not be the prettiest brake lever, but I can assure you it's going to hold up and get you home. So you obviously toss this, and now I'm not sure if you can see this, but now we have a clutch lever again. That is I mean, I can flex it a little bit because it has only sat for, well, 10 minutes. But in about 30 minutes to an hour, this thing is going to be so stiff that you won't even be able to move it anywhere. We'll just cut this little sliver off here. So again, yep, it's not as pretty as that one, but it will get you home. I can assure you of that. And again, all we used was carbon fiber tape that was 2 inches wide by 10 inch. Your hardware store grade 5-minute epoxy, a cup and a stir stick, electrical tape and a couple of gloves, and some plastic. You don't necessarily need the plastic, but since you are working on a time restraint, it is really much, much better that you have a surface to work on. What could that be in the wilderness? Motorcycle seat. Just make sure you bring enough so that you don't start adding epoxy to your motorcycle seat. But you're not going to mix more than a couple of spoonfuls here, and all you're going to do is really just impregnate that piece of carbon tape. So wherever you decide to do that, probably the best place would be a motorcycle seat. But again, I would say you can fix bigger structural issues as well. This stuff is really tremendously strong. The 5-minute epoxy, not so much in itself, or not so much in itself, but once you add the carbon fiber to it, it becomes just a wonderful, strong medium that you can work with, fix just by anything you want. Another thing that breaks a lot, some of those plastic cases, Givy cases, Pelican cases when you're out in the wilderness, and once they go kablooey, I get it, some of the manufacturers, they make these things that they're meant to break away so they don't take your subframe out of the motorcycle in the process. Well, that's all good, but it would be nice to not have to bungee that thing back together. With this stuff here, you could just ninja these pieces together, whether it's a clutch lever or a piece on a Pelican case or on a Givy case, to get that thing back attached. And you would just, instead of roll stuff around a medium, you just cut little band-aids of carbon fiber tape out and stuff it on there, hold it in there, build it up like band-aid on a cut on your skin, really. And you can do that relatively quick, but do it in stages. Don't mix for the whole thing, because you're going to end up with a box of goo that you can't use. Do it a little bit, maybe 2-inch slivers of the tape at a time, and it'll get you home. So I'll go back on the website here. That's really what I had. Just a quick little doing here. If you have any questions, I'd encourage you to type them in the chat bar, and I'll try to answer them the best I can for a few minutes here, and then we'll call it a great day. I see there's about, it's pretty hot here in the garage. I think my computer is running pretty warm. So I'm going to say there is about a 3-minute delay, if not more. So I'll hang around for a little bit and see if anybody has any questions, and then have a look at it and go from there. This video will be obviously taped and be up on my Facebook, my YouTube channel as well. eBrabeck is my username if you haven't seen that already. It will also be linked on my Facebook page, High Desert Carbon Works. Just go to Facebook, and in the search bar, if you're not already a member or a follower or a lurker or a liker, whatever they call them nowadays, Just type, go to Facebook, type in the search bar, High Desert Carbon Works. This video will be archived there as well and linked to there, and maybe there's some other projects that you might enjoy. So we'll see. I don't see any questions here, so we'll let it run for a few more minutes. Thanks a lot for tuning in. You can also get a hold of me through my Facebook page. The YouTube, not so much. I don't usually, I just simply, I'm sorry, but since this is worldwide, I just have too many questions, and I just simply, as much as I want to, I can't answer them all. Just they come from all over the world, and I try to when it's really, but I just can't. The best way to get a hold of me is through my Facebook, High Desert Carbon Works, and I'll try to answer all the questions I can. Well, no questions, no answers here. So for all I know, this may have been just a jittery, jarry something. So maybe we'll go back and look at it. But thanks again for tuning in. It's been kind of fun. Hope you got a little bit out of it. If not, you know how to get a hold of me. Thanks a lot.